Our conversation this hour, of course, has got to look at what's happening in the country right now, right? We have seen the mass outpouring of emotion and where people are saying, okay, we need to have a conversation. We've seen the government, the president himself saying, I acknowledge that there's actually something being said. Okay, what exactly is being said? There are those that have brought in the issue of budgets. And I say that's the big issue here. It's about the public finance management and where our economy is at present. This headline by the Business Daily today says, deadly tax protests leave Kenya facing IMF fallout. This story is basically saying, Parliament yesterday passed the finance bill and they amended some of the proposals that have been brought to them by the executive, the National Treasury. Some of those proposals have been a negotiation with the IMF. Yeah? Including weka motor vehicle tax 2.5%, weka VAT kwa financial transactions, weka excise duty kwa vegetable oils, weka excise duty on airtime and mobile money transfers, fanya hivi KRA. Can you have better access to people who are tax cheats? Can you get data about them? Link your system to the mobile network so that you can just see CT ana receive pesa ngapi kwa M-Pesa?
Limit ya M-Pesa kwanza ni pesa ngapi? 500,000.
Na alichukua hustler fanjuzi.
Yes. Yes.
Na anakuja hapa kutumia na pesa.
Alichukua pesa wazee. Akachukua youth fund. Yes.
Na anasema ati ana pesa.
This same person.
Yes. Na ana pesa. Parliament says, no. We cannot allow you to do that. That unfettered access to such kind of data, it's an invasion of people's privacy. And remember what we've been told by the data commissioner here before? Your data is your dignity.
Yes, it is.
So, now, where does the IMF go? That's why we have invited Robert Gitachu. He is a managing partner at Africorn Advisory to come so we can have this conversation. Robert, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the hot seat of the situation.
Thank you very much.
Mambo iko namna gani?
Mambo ni moto.
Kabisa. Very good. Wewe ndio umejua. Wewe ndio umejua. Mambo ni moto. But karibu sana. We're going to have a conversation throughout. Welcome. CT will welcome you with the day's proverb today. The proverb is from?
Our proverbs for the whole of this week come from the Islamic Republic of Mauritania.
Yeah, and Robert, please listen to today's proverb very carefully and you'll give us the interpretation.
If you tickle the earth with a djembe, she laughs with a harvest.
Thank you for using the word djembe. Phew.
All right.
You are feeling better.
Let me read it as it was written. If you tickle the earth with a hoe, she laughs with a harvest.
Quite insightful.
What do you think it's saying?
Well, I don't know what it says. It depends on how you want to interpret it.
That is precisely what you want to do.
But I mean, if you're going to, if you tickle the earth with a hoe, this laughter is harvest. So you have to put in at least something, whatever little there is, into something to produce. Unless you're giving us a different interpretation on that.
Actually, your interpretation is what we want.
Yep.
Yes, and you can't be wrong with an interpretation because that is how you resonate with the proverb. That's how you
exactly
see it. Yes.
That's a good one, though.
It is a good one.
It is. It is a good one. You have to do something, put something to get something out of it. Right?
Absolutely.
Sawa. What do you do for a living, Robert?
Well, my background is actually in corporate finance, so I raise money for private equity. However, I'm also heavily involved as a consultant within the wash industry. So I also run accelerator programs for wash-specific enterprises.
Wash is what?
Wash, the water, sanitation, and hygiene.
Yeah.
So, yes. So I'm involved in some of those kind of initiatives.
Okay. Now, we are seeing what's happening in the country right now. Okay? First, I want to ask you whether you agree with us that what we are hearing from Gen Zs and all the other generations and the people who are speaking, they're talking about the state of the economy and the state of the management of that economy by those in authority. Do you agree?
Well, I certainly... what we are witnessing right now is actually far-fetched from what we are just seeing at the forefront here. Because I see what we are seeing right now is actually the product of a bigger picture. And it's just, and I think this is just actually just the beginning of an awakening of people understanding who they are as a people, what is actually affecting them, the bottom line effects and everything. But of course, as we move on, we'll be able to see what is actually causing all the hula baloo around the finance bill, what could be other powers that we're not seeing that could be trying to push for some of these issues. Of course, there's a little mischief therein, and then we'll be able to see. And I guess, as you mentioned earlier, we are actually talking about certain aspects such as the World Bank, the IMF loans and the likes, which I'm sure we'll be able to delve into that as we proceed.
People have talked about the IMF here, IMF there all the time. We just hear, oh, this IMF prepared the budget, IMF. Why always the IMF? I mean, what's this feeling about or against the IMF?
Well, I think we need to look at where we are coming from as a country, and especially in terms of our debt and how we borrow money. And we go all the way back to the Kibaki regime that had a more concessional kind of way of looking at debt. And when we talk about the concessional debt, we are literally looking as loans with original grant elements of about, say, 35% or more. And you actually can see what that did in the previous regime. In that regime, revenues actually grew by about $1 trillion, but then concessional loans, which were primarily from the African Development Bank. We moved to the Uhuru regime, who decided that I won't go ahead with the concessional loans and move to the commercial loans. Now, this was a clever way to move from a bit of monitoring, if you are to ask me. It's more of a monitoring and evaluation kind of hide and seek game. Now, these commercial loans obviously are more easy to access at market price, and they come easily. However, if we look at also what happens with some of these commercial loans, it's easy to hide small aspects and would that actually bring along about corruption. All right. And so herein we start seeing the first time when the government really started competing with the private sector for local credit. And if we are to remember, well, we had the issue of the rate cap at that time. However, COVID came and started exposing certain gaps and then the previous regime, that's the Uhuru regime, then decided to go back to the concessional debt for IMF. Now, what are we looking at today? Now, we are coming up in a current regime that says, we've taken over bad government, we didn't even have cash and everything, all right? But as we can see, one of their priorities was to retire the commercial debt and substitute it with actually more of long-term concessional debt. All right? But nonetheless, we can still see that the current government is not doing enough in enabling the private sector growth to increase revenues, to at least cushion some of these industries against the effects of IMF, their structural adjusted programs and all. And then we'll be able to certainly see what some of these things and some of the areas they are hitting, like health, education, social protection, and the likes.
When we get to where we are, because this is what you're saying, that in the 9 years of the Jubilee administration, Uhuru 1, Uhuru 2, there was move towards the commercial market. There was heavy borrowing. These commercial loans are starting to mature as we get here.
That's right.
And then there is now a heavy burden on the revenue that is generated locally to go towards paying that and also meet other budgetary obligations. And this is where now the IMF starts coming in, because now you start looking at, okay, we are in some kind of distress and we need someone that we can talk to. And the IMF says, come on, I've got my doors open. Come, let's talk. And as you come, let's talk. The IMF says, all right, so how are you going to be able to raise the money? Because you must raise money to pay your debt. Even if I gave you some Fuliza, you will still have to look for money to pay my Fuliza. So is there anything untoward in that? In this person coming to say, I am willing to help you, but then we've got to work together in how you increase the amount of money that you can raise, because it's the amount of money that you need to pay. I owe Robert 10 million shillings, my income is 1,000. You've got to look for more income, boss. What?
Meaning you've got to convince me you can pay this, and the only way you can convince me is if you can demonstrate that you're going to collect more. Because when you collect more, then you're able to pay me.
Yep.
And I like the fact that you've actually just said the word I was going to come to. And because you have to be able to, as you said, you have to be able to demonstrate the ability to pay. And that's why if you look at how the IMF loans are structured, they're actually paid in installments, all right? And they are linked to what you're saying, actually demonstrable policy actions. And these ones take different forms. Now, those are the kind of forms we need to be able to start understanding. What kind of forms do they take, all right? We need revenue mobilization and priority to clear even external debt, all right? We are looking at quantitative performance criteria, which actually has very measurable conditions to be able to offset that. And all of these are related to macroeconomic variables. Now, we also need to understand that we have indicative benchmarks, which are usually flexible numerical trackers that actually supplement meeting some of these targets. And some of these are the kind of things we've been hearing about, like the government wage bill, ceilings on spending on social sectors and the likes. And lastly, it's important to also look at things that we are calling structural benchmarks. Now, these are more qualitative indicators that assess programs implementation and actually look at strengthening tax administration and reforming state-owned enterprises. And all of these are discussions we have been able to hear of them, especially in the last 18 months or so. None of these things are new. We listen to them. They disappear in the back of our minds without understanding the macroeconomic effects and how it actually trickles down to the common mananchi.
Okay. How does it actually trickle down? And I think that's the thing now, that when these conversations are being had at whatever, roundtable over discussion, when we're talking about the IMF, it seems as though some amorphous body somewhere that we don't know. But how does it affect people, these decisions that are made?
All right, so let's go back to April 2021 when the IMF actually started up. We actually had an approval of a $2.3 billion credit arrangement. All right, this was actually what was called, it was under the extended credit facility and the extended fund facility. And this was for a period of 3 years. But we see that the government kept on going back to the negotiation table with actually 6 reviews of these things. And part of the key consolidations we could see were the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, where we kept on seeing every month fuel prices actually being adjusted. And we have witnessed every single month. We don't know whether the price of fuel is going up or down, but we actually saw it for a long time. It kept on going up. We also have the monetary.
How is that new?
Sorry?
How is that new?
I mean, but it's actually a condition. Remember we talked about certain conditions that have to be met? So
what's the condition there?
So the condition here, the government has to keep on trying to raise money. But we have been able to... but if you actually listen to the current sentiments, especially over the last 24 hours, the subsidies that actually the government claims to be imposing on fuel and the fuel levies and everything, are they really trickling down to the common man? I mean, that's why I said earlier, there's a kind of hide-and-seek game in all these things, even as we're trying to talk about structural amendments and policy reviews, all right? We have seen the CBR rates going upwards, all right? Borrowing money from banks is becoming almost impossible, especially for industries, and we are also going to see the manufacturing sector has a barely less than maybe 7% growth year on year.
Why is it impossible for industry to borrow?
Well, if the government is starting to actually increase the CBR rate, what does that mean? The ultimate effect is that the borrowing rate for banks, the base rate actually goes high.
What is CBR?
So the CBR is actually the central bank rate as set by the central bank. So they have a minimum set of requirements, all right, and a minimum rate where that they actually transfer to the banks. Now, if the banks now decide our base borrowing rate has now gone, say, to 14, 15, 16%, if they are to adjust whatever margins they're going to adjust based on, say, your credit ratings and the likes, how much will we go to a place where you'll be paying interest rates of 25, 30%? How many business can even afford that kind of return on investment?
I can see that. Connect that to IMF conditions.
Well, one of the things then we are going to look, if you look at the IMF conditions, some of the tax measures that they had, we have a couple of them. One, we are talking about subsidy reductions. There's some subsidies we have been seeing in fuel levies and everything, all right? Just one of them, we have VAT that has actually now increased from 8 to at least 16% and the likes, all right? We have also the housing levies, social health funds, social sector spending, higher education, new funding model. We can see the new CBC model, much as it's actually one of the sectors that has really gained from the current budget, but we are not quite addressing a holistic approach to bringing everything. I mean, we cannot look at certain items in isolation when you're trying to grow up an economy. We have to look at very many basically the holistic picture of how does all this come together? How does education tie to housing tie into education, to social security and all these things? So we cannot be talking about trying to mitigate interest rates or trying to adjust budgets to suit certain sectors while ignoring other sectors altogether.
But Robert, I'm not getting what a meeting between the government of Kenya and IMF sat and discussed and agreed on the education sector. I mean, what is this condition that has been imposed by the IMF on the education sector? Are they saying defund education? Are they saying stop funding free primary school? What is this? Because we can't just be saying, we are seeing funding, we are seeing this, we are seeing prices of fuel increasing, and we all blanketly call it IMF. So what exactly is it that we can tie down and say,
This.
because of this condition that was imposed by the IMF, this requirement that was made by the IMF, and the government agreeing to this requirement, the resultant effect is
All right.
a rise in fuel prices.
So one of the things we need to understand that the ultimate goal of IMF is to ensure that the debt, whatever debt that we get from them, needs to be paid back.
Yeah.
So now we have obviously the budget that is actually proposed. They will have a look at it and they will realize, how shall we get our money back? What are the sectors where budgetary allocations actually make a highest? How can we take a piece of that to make sure that this debt gets paid back? So it's not specifically that the education sector is the one that is specifically hit, but if a certain cut can be brought down on that, yet divert the same towards paying the public debt, then it will happen. Is it social protection? It will go to others. Is it health? It will be cut. Certain cuts will be done.
But those are cut automatically.
Automatically.
Yes.
Because you see, the first charge of the consolidated fund is debt.
That's right.
Then the rest is when now you'll decide whether you'll buy a shoe or you'll buy bread or you'll buy sausage or bacon, right? So it's automatic. It can't be that they are looking at can you reduce the amount of money that you're allocating to education. It is how much are you raising. If their focus is in how much you're raising, if your target is 2.7, can you raise it to 4 trillion shillings? And then how do you get to the 4 trillion shillings? Then that means that if you can actually get to 3.5, then you can repay me my 2 trillion.
And I hear you. However, when we look at actually revenue vis-a-vis expenditure, how much is actually being spent to repaying this? 70% of our revenues are going towards repayment of this debt. So how does that even become sustainable? What is actually really even left to run an economy? And especially to run some of these key areas that we know are actually the ones that spur an economy to move forward. So much as we are still saying that, and I totally agree with what you're saying, but we need to also understand that the government is actually a matter of prioritization. The government needs to be able to put its foot down and say, listen, we also have a country to run. We understand the conditionalities that the IMF consolidation has come in, and some of the things that we agreed. Go back to the drawing table. Make it very clear. This is not sustainable. All right?
So essentially what we're saying here is that there's money that is needed by Kenya. So I'm trying to put blocks together in ways that I can understand. There's money that is needed by Kenya for certain things. Call it development, call it whatever you want. The IMF, as an institution, of a financial institution which lends money to Kenya, usually comes with conditions, and they're saying, we'll lend you this money, but there's certain things that we want you to do.
Exactly.
Now, essentially what we're saying is that some of those conditions are throttling the country, that they do not then allow government to do what it's supposed to do when we talk about ease of doing business or a conducive environment under which employment can be created and when development will thrive. But then Kenya as a country is still hard pressed to make the decision between going it alone or taking the loan from the IMF. Is that what we're saying now?
Going alone. And I think when you talk about going alone, again, there have been discussions. Do we really need all this level of debt? We are one of the very heavily indebted countries that we know of in sub-Saharan Africa. Why don't we have discussions around cutting on expenditure? How much money is being spent on unnecessary items? All right? Without mentioning any specific office, there have been comparisons on how certain offices, on the kind of money that is actually going to certain offices that are not deemed necessary, and how that money could, in parallel, actually be diverted to things that can help the general good of an economy. So, and I think it's where we just need to get to a point and be very, very honest with ourselves and actually start holding some of these offices accountable.
So are you saying that IMF money is not needed in Kenya and that you can do away with it and get it somewhere else?
Well, I do certainly believe over a period of time we can structure ourselves out of unnecessary debt. What I would actually call unnecessary debt. While debt is an essential part of service, but we do not need to make it the mainstream of this, say, quote-unquote, income. Because this debt has actually almost been used as a source of income for some certain people. All right? We are not mentioning any names here, but we have seen what's happening.
Shall we help you mention?
Robert, you are talking about our debt situation and saying, okay, so there are some debts that are unnecessary. And we need to have this conversation of what do we need to borrow, what do we not need to borrow. Do we need to look back at what we have borrowed so far? Because it's eating us, man. When we have to pay 1.8 trillion shillings this year to debt in terms of interest and principal, and we're only raising 2.3 trillion shillings in ordinary revenue, buana. This debt is like we are working for debt.
Well, let us look at others who've gone before us. Our situation is not unique. All right? However, we are at a point where we can do something about it. We have the Greece study, we have the Portugal Case studies, from where we can actually draw certain lessons. All right? If we even just start from the Greece case study, we're actually looking at a point where from the European Union, they actually were trying to, quote-unquote, help them not to default on its debts and go bankrupt. But what did that come with? There are certain conditions for being able to access some of this debt. All right? There were cuts in public sector salaries. All right? There were reforms in government as well. That actually were aimed to decrease up to 26.4% in payments to pensioners. And we have been hearing conversations again about our own health funds, our own retirement funds. And I think I heard someone today only saying there's nothing. We are looking at empty coffers. All right. We are also looking at the introduction of new tax measures. All right. None of these things are new to us. We are actually witnessing them as we move along this journey. All right. These measures did not work. All right. So why didn't they work? They needed to be able to go back and relook at some of these sectors, what really is needed to spur these sectors up, all right?
When you say spur the sector, who was supposed to look at these things? Is it government?
Government cannot look at it in isolation, all right? We have the government, we have treasury, we have parliamentarians, we have public stakeholders.
These are all government, because government has three arms. Parliament, yes, is part of government. Judiciary is part of government. Executive is part of government. Yes, so let me say what I hear you saying. I hear you saying that given where we are and what is happening, there is a need to understand how best we can manage this money that we have so that, A, it helps spur on the economy, and also that it helps us sort out whatever matters we may have relating to debt and so forth. Is that what I hear you saying?
Let us go to one of the most fundamental principles of finance. It's actually capital preservation. All right? Mm-hmm. Before you even start talking about do we need to borrow money, what are you doing with what you currently have? How much of it are you trying to preserve? And we are not seeing that. We are not seeing a situation where we approach our finance bill from first a component of preserving whatever revenues that we are collecting.
Tell me, how would preservation look like? I'm asking because I don't know. If the country was preserving its capital as you suggest, or as you say they should, how would that look like? I, as a layman, as a citizen, what would I need to see to know that we are actually preserving our money?
Very nice. So budgets being budgets, we know all the sectors that require their financing. We know sectors that have actually been at the forefront of stimulating the economy. We can, obviously, you need to start by actually seeing what are these sectors. All right? How much is currently being allocated to them? How much are they overall coming back to help us in an economy to go up? All right? Then as we trickle down, we start seeing other smaller, I wouldn't call them less priority areas. They're also important, but maybe not as urgent areas. Now, we now have a decent deficit on this. How can we get the loans for this? How can they be repaid? All right. We are looking also again, we have also been seeing the government again borrowing from all these infrastructure bonds and all that. All right. So now the government is coming back to borrow from the people. All right. Well, that is all right. But where is all this money really going back to? So we start again, capital preservation, make sure first and foremost, whatever we collect is actually going to the appropriate sectors. Yeah. All right. We can have them as percentages of GDPs. There are policies around that. They know how they do the math about the percentages on the GDPs and start reallocating and starting to identify if we have a deficit, where is our lowest hanging fruit where we can actually borrow at favorable terms.
Okay. Well, Robert, hasn't that horse bolted? We have an 11 trillion shilling debt burden. 11 trillion. In a 13 trillion shilling GDP economy, right? We are paying close to 2 trillion shillings every year to debt. That's a lot of money. Even if we started saying, okay, let's rationalize this and the other, the elephant, 2 elephants in the room is the debt. If close to 80%, if not more, of your revenues are going to repaying the debt, what is it not possible to actually say, let's sit and look at the debt and see how can we play around this debt repayment? Number one, there have been questions that have been asked. People like Okoa Uchumi and other movements have asked the question, can we see the debt register? They've asked, can we see the contracts for SGR, for example? Can we see how much we are paying, who we owe and how much we're paying, and the conditions for these debts? Maybe this is a conversation we should be having. Like, can we review our debt right now as a matter of urgency? Can we have a conversation about this debt? Yes, there's this grand old fear of default. Okay, what is this grand old fear of default? What is the actual implication of defaulting, if there is any? What happens? Which one is a better pill to swallow between this and the other? But I feel if we don't address this debt, we cannot avoid going to the people like the IMF and sitting there, and they'll still tell us, how much do you need to pay this year? 1.8 trillion shillings. 1.8 trillion shillings. And how much are you raising? So far, sir, we have raised about 2 trillion. Have you paid salaries? No, sir. No. Have you paid pension? No, sir. Have you put money into education? No, sir. Have you put money into health? No, sir. Have you put money into counties? No, sir. Into agriculture? Not yet, sir. And what is your idea? We are thinking maybe if we can just ask the people. No, you cannot just ask the people. Can you go and... That's what they're going to tell us. Because you're at that point where you have our hands are tied and we are operating like our mouths are gagged.
Permit me to respond to that.
Please.
The horse has bolted, but even horses need to stop and drink and rest. All right?
Yeah.
And so all is not lost. It's really a question of us pausing and deciding now, what's the reality we are looking at? All right? Portugal, in just 3 years, started making turnaround in its economy. All right? And we're actually looking at a point where in 2015, Portugal actually abandoned their fiscal consolidation for the new economic policies. I don't see what's extremely difficult
because
for
they're
us.
already at a good point.
They were already at a really bad point because of the same loans we're talking about and the austerity measures. So the conditions for these loans are actually what is actually the noose on our necks. And it's actually something that we can decide as a country to do away with. All right? What did that do for such an economy? All right? Literally just saying, you know what? We are tired of these external debts from, say, the African Development Banks, the IMFs, and the likes. All right? And that's why I like what they are called Chumi with the Institute of Social Accountability are doing. All right? And these are people I'm working closely with. All right? So we are looking at one. The government increased the minimum wage within 2 years as a result of getting rid of this kind of fiscal consolidations.
In Portugal.
All right? In Portugal. There was actually reverse regressive tax increases. And we actually can see how the taxes currently are going.
Reverse? What again?
It's actually a reverse regressive tax increase. So if you look at the current regime, our tax increase is actually very regressive. They're not stimulating anything. If anything, they're making you dig deeper, not to become more innovative, to become more productive. All right? Now, they also return the public sector wages and pensions to their pre-crisis levels. Can we actually take these public sector wages?
Yes, we can.
Will our public servants permit that to happen, or will they keep on saying that?
What will they do that will demonstrate their refusal?
Exactly. And that is why we are seeing our young ones coming to defend the same. All right? They are up in arms, they're sick and tired.
Okay.
They can see the reality.
What else did Portugal
And
do?
the other thing we can actually see is that they actually reintroduced 4 cancelled holidays. Now, I'm not too sure about reintroducing public holidays. I feel in Kenya we've already had too many holidays.
No, we don't.
All right? You
So
think
they
we need some more holidays?
reintroduced the holidays.
They actually
So they
did
had
that.
actually cancelled holidays.
They had actually
want you to
cancelled.
be at work.
That's right.
We are not paying you for no work.
Yes.
Okay.
So you see, that is what they did.
And this is a
especially in the
condition.
holiday. I'm not saying we should do
These are
that.
conditions that had come from the other guys.
No.
from the lenders.
These are steps they decided to
These
take.
are exactly.
No,
These
no,
are the steps
but
they decided
when
to
the-
take.
When they were removing the holidays,
Yes.
was that a condition that had been imposed by the lenders?
I mean, the lender.
Because what we are saying here is that Portugal has decided to tell the lenders, get out of the room for a bit. We want to have this conversation as family. Wacha kwanza family yongee, tutawaita. And one of the things that family decided is people have been enjoying these 2 days of holiday. These guys came and told us, remove these 2 days of holiday. No, we are going back to 2 days
If
of
I wasn't
holiday.
to them, there's 4.
4, right?
That's the right idea.
And these guys had come in and told us here that you have to impose tax on this. Mtu akienda kinyozi, weka chukua tax.
And they're saying no.
Nywele ikigrow chukua tax. And they're like, get out of the room. No. We are not going to do tax on kinyozi. Okay? Those regressive taxes, absolutely not. So it's pushed back against the lenders.
As it should be.
That's what Portugal has done.
They actually did a really good job pushing.
I want to hear more of this list.
What else?
All right. Now, all right, we know the public holidays. I mean, every single day, if Kenyans are not working, there is a cost to the economy, all right? So how they did that, but at least it worked for them. There was also the component where after they did away with the fiscal consolidation, it actually also increased social security for vulnerable families. And that is part of the biggest pressing issue we're actually facing today. Look at the Mama Linda. Look at all these other things that are slowly going down the shambles. All right? And we're also looking at imposing of luxury changes on homes worth a certain given amount. So we need to be able to look at also the income brackets. Where should we really be focusing on taxing based on also revenue, income? All right. Now, what did this do? This recovery plan for Portugal actually grew the GDP by 2.7% in 2017, which was actually a 17-year high. And that's what I'm saying, in just 3 years. We have the opportunity, if we do the proper fiscal consolidation and austerity measures, we have the possibility and the potential to start getting out of some of these messes that we're getting ourselves in. All right? And we're also looking at actually other aspects such as fiscal deficits. Then we need to start finding out what, from against the regressive tax measures that we're discussing, especially the manufacturing sector. What can we do to stimulate that sector back up? Because as we're saying, we're talking about a maximum growth of just about 7% per annum. We are not looking at a very good space.
Can I ask a question? The question is related to your question. Are we saying we don't know what we need to do?
No, I cannot say we do not know what we need to do. But it's really a question of let me look at it in terms of...
Is it a willingness to do or an inability to do something?
When a child is growing up, they predominantly take instructions from their parents. Is that right?
Yes.
After a certain age of maturity,
yes,
they know what they need to do. But do they always do what they need to do?
In fact, children disobey you from a very early age. It's just that you don't realize it. And it's just that they understand the repercussions of disobedience, that they give the impression of compliance. You only need to understand that part of the reason why parents keep being called to school on matters relating to their children is because those children have displayed,
the disobedience.
Yes, exactly. And the parent says, but this is not my child. Of course it isn't. The child that you have at home is a child who's constrained. This child in school is free. So the school gets to see a side of them that you don't get to see. So where are we here? Are we at the stage where we are behaving ourselves and we need to be reined in, or we are misbehaving and we need to be reined in? What is it? Because when we talk solutions, when we talk about what needs to be done, and we quote countries that have done certain things, let's quote ourselves. We had a president who seemed to have understood what needs to be done about these things and did it. The difficult decisions were made. Because every time we talk about these loans, I think of these personal loans that the banks give people. They're not really different from these IMF and all these loan things. Yeah, first of all, they tell you, pay slip. That's a requirement. Letter from employer, guaranteed. And if you're earning 20,000 shillings, you can't ask for a loan of 4 million. They won't give you. Okay? So it's the same. It's not as though the IMF have come up with requirements that are very far-fetched. My problem with some of the requirements is they seem experimental. Because countries, people talk about IMF as though, yes, they're the land of last resort. But they also lend to first world countries. They do lend.
They do.
And the reason why they lend, and on those terms, the terms of those people, because those people, there's no question that they can't pay, they can pay. So the question I'm asking is, how do we get to the position where when we borrow money, we can actually tell IMF the terms on which we want to borrow, instead of them telling us the terms on which they want to give us the money?
You did mention there will always be consequences of defiance.
Yes.
So we need to understand as a country, what are these consequences if we do not play along?
I'm actually not talking defiance. I'm talking about coming to an understanding, because these are people who lend people money. They are a bank. You can understand each other. You can agree. We've borrowed before. We've repaid before. We haven't defaulted. There are all manner of things that we can say. And then let us look seriously at the conditions that they're giving us. Are they too far-fetched, in all honesty? I sometimes think it's sheer voodoo. But is there sense in what they're saying? And have they seen something that we ourselves have been unwilling to face?
Well, are they too far-fetched? The reality is yes. The conditionalities are too far-fetched. We do not have, and I think we're also forgetting there's a component of governance here at play. where if we look at all these set conditions, is it tax increases, stimulus packages that are either not forthcoming and the likes, or all with every measure aimed at actually just raising money to go and please a grandmaster in repayment. All right? So are they too far-fetched? Absolutely. And you said, yes, we need to get back to the table and negotiate. And say, hey, look at all these conditionalities. Look at all these sectors that we are being forced to either cut budgets on. What can we do about this? How can these things be restructured?
Okay. Does that fit into the larger conversation then about a push to restructure the global financial system? Because there's that push and saying, look, you are treating us like we are lesser children of a lesser God. Like Citi is saying, even those developed countries still go to the same institutions and they borrow. They borrow at far better terms, lower interest, all these conditionalities. You pull teeth, 3 teeth before you come. Yeah, all those are not imposed on them. Then there is the global south that has all these conditions imposed on everything that's happening. That just keeps you in that dependency mode. Is this fitting into that larger conversation that, yes, as we say, let's push back on these multilateral lenders on what they're telling us. Let's also push back on what they always tell us.
One of the biggest setbacks that we always have is that we borrow in foreign denominated currencies. All right? So as that when our currency especially depreciates, what does that mean? Your repayment becomes larger. All right? And it's actually at the very premise of even just saying, listen, can we borrow at favorable domiciled currencies that actually favor us to be able to do what we must do? Yeah? So that if we borrow at that level, then we are able to start saying, what are these other things that we can... Because first and foremost, these foreign gains and appreciations gains and the likes, we need to first and foremost take care of that. But what are all these other things? What are the alternative revenue mobilization kind of policies we can come up with? And as I said, we need to really just first figure out, we need to identify where the main streams of revenue for this country lie. And therein, know how then can we tax them in a manner to still stimulate their continued growth while pushing for growth and supporting weaker sectors of the economy.
Sustainability.
Exactly.
There's been a conversation on the tax policy. And now there is, of course, the medium tax revenue strategy and all these things that are, happening. It's about having them on paper and implementing them. Robert, this is an interesting conversation. I'd love to have you back here again so we can continue with it. Robert Gitachu is a managing partner at Africorn Advisory. He's been here. We've been talking about the state of the economy and our debt versus our lenders.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.